So this is an example of one of my painting breakdowns. When I teach workshops, this is what I usually do with my students. I typically have a 12 by 16 inch block of paper, and we draw the scene twice, and I break the scene down into basically three values. The white of the paper is representative of the first light wash on the color painting, and I try and join as much as I can out of the scene into a large middle value shape. And what that does is it just kind of establishes the composition. It simplifies everything, and it provides all these wonderful lost edges that are just so great in watercolor, where the paint and pigment is just kind of mixing together on the paper, which is makes it look like a watercolor. I think too often people paint a watercolor with small brushes, and they paint this collection of 40 different shapes with all these hard edges or white gaps between them, and they're really robbing themselves of what makes watercolors so unique in those big fluid passages. So I try and connect everything as much as I can in the value study, and I'm going to do a value study of this scene tonight to kind of explain it. But it transitions really well, and it's not just sunshine, sunlight, and shadow. When you're talking about these values, it's actually it's value. Okay, so even on a rainy day or a snowy day or something, you're still going to have those value shifts that you can, um, point to on your scenes. And it works, no matter what type of scene I'm doing. I'm always trying to find that one big connected shape, and then find the small little dark details to add some accents to it. And it just helps to, like I said, simplify everything in my mind's eye before I go into the color painting. I was a medical illustrator, and I struggled, but when I first started to paint, just putting too much detail in the scenes. I was trying to loosen up, loosen up, loosen up. Everybody tries to loosen up all the time with their watercolors, and so finding that one big shape really helped me. And it's helped a lot of students as well. Like I said, when I teach workshops, the light bulb goes off after a couple days of what I'm trying to, talk about, how I approach every scene, really finding that big shape, and it really does work. And then obviously in the color painting, there's a lot more involved in it, but that value study to simplify things initially is so helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a value study of this scene for tonight. Everybody, I think you should have had this either sent to you or available to you if you wanted to try along here. But this is a scene from Pin Mill. When I was teaching at Dedham Hall in England, we always head out to Pin Mill to paint. It's a wonderful spot. Always great subject matter there to paint. So when I start my drawing, I always start like this. I'm going to zoom in here real quick so you can see this. Just very loosely, I'm making sure everything is going to fit on the paper. So I don't actually start the drawing first. I just kind of do these very light block in lines with the pencil, making sure everything is going to fit on the page. It's the right scale and all, and then I'll go in and tighten up my drawing after that. So I'll let you, I didn't want to finish the drawing or anything. I'm gonna have to do this twice, once for value study and once for the painting. But I don't draw a lot. I've been drawing my whole life, and I'm pretty quick at it. And I think overdrawing is actually kind of a problem as well if people are trying to simplify their watercolor paintings. If they spend too much time on the drawing, it inhibits the loose painting process. So I try and just get the largest shapes on here and then move along. Actually don't like how this sailboat is right on top of this pylon here, so I'm going to move it over a bit this direction, I think. I started to draw this in there, but I'm already making an executive decision and just kind of moving it, tucking it over this direction a little bit in the scene, so it's not there. It's a bad tangent. And these other boats aren't that interesting anyway, so it doesn't matter if I'm eliminating some of those. I don't want to take too much away from the star of the show, all the activity over here. Okay, everything is going to fit on the page. So now I'm going to go ahead and kind of darken up my drawing. And again, this is just for going to be for the value study, so it doesn't have to be great. This is just to work out in my mind's eye how I'm going to take all that noise and simplify it down into just a couple of large shapes. And there's a couple of little boats back here, some color on it. All right. Now here's the first figure. And when I'm putting my figures in, I try and keep them nice and simple as well. Now they're all chatting standing next to each other, overlapping, connecting already into a couple of simplified shapes. It's important that their heads all sort of align to about the same height. And I keep my pencil on the paper often when I'm doing this drawing too, kind of a contour drawing. And what that does is by keeping my pencil on the paper, I'm already thinking about connections, even at the drawing stage. I'm just going from one shape to the next to the next. How does this shape align and connect to that shape? And it does help me keep me from overdrawing as well. I'm not drawing details. I'm just kind of sticking to the large shapes. All right, somebody working on the boat there. There's a little bucket or something here, front end of my vehicle. Keeping it nice and simple. Back end of the vehicle is open. All right. All that's in there. We got some puddles and reflections and things here. Here's that.
Sound on here.
And we've got this little walkway here and another little.
Is it there? Is it okay? Hold it. But you can't hear it. Sorry.
Everybody hear me okay?
No, I can't. I can hear.
Okay. Okay. Everything is working fine. All right, so my drawing is on there. So now what I do for the value study, like I said, I'm going to squint down at the scene and ask myself, what is light, relatively speaking, in this subject compared to everything else? So the white paper is going to represent basically that first light wash of the color painting. Okay, so when I squint down at this scene, I'm seeing the sky is light. Obviously the white air, the sunlit areas of this large boat here, but it's got a lot of, even though the whole boat is white, it's got a lot of shadow, middle value, and dark on it. So just the sunlit parts of that boat are going to stay in the light. Sky is light. The sailboat, the sails on the sailboats, a couple other little boats are lighter. The water itself maybe can stay lighter in that first wash. This little rivulet of water here, that channel, and a bit down here, there's some patches of light, the mud, some of the reflections and things, that little white pail, some on the back of their legs, okay? So some of them, when I get down here, it might be a little trickier. There's some smaller sunlit areas, the windows of the van here, a couple things in the back are lighter shapes. But I'm going to try and connect everything else as much as I can into one large middle value shape. And that is going to guide my hand for the first two large stages of the color painting. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mix one large puddle of middle value Payne's Gray. Most of my, I'm going to switch over to my palette here. So my palette is fairly straightforward. I just have a series of cooler colors here. I have Payne's Gray. Now I use mostly Winsor and Newton paints. And Winsor Newton Payne's Gray is a very cool color. It's got some blue in it. So I put it up here next to my French ultramarine. And then over here I have the neutral tint, which is a warmer color. So I put that by my earth tones, my burnt sienna. But I have basically just blues, yellows, and reds on my palette. You know, it's kind of a primary palette. I don't have any greens. This is cobalt turquoise. That's as close to green as I get. So I much prefer to mix my greens. So this is Payne's Gray, French ultramarine, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, and cobalt turquoise. And then I've got neutral tint, burnt sienna, yellow ochre or raw sienna, depending on what I have there. Quinacridone gold, which I don't use much of, and Winsor Newton actually is stopping. They're not making quinacridone gold anymore, but there's a new color called, I think it's transparent gold or something like that. And I bought a tube of that, and the hue is very similar to quinacridone gold. It's not quite as intense, but it's fine. I don't use it that much. So, but that's that color. This is cadmium lemon, alizarin crimson, permanent rose, cadmium red, and lavender. Lavender is made by Holbein. That's the lavender that I use. It's got some white in it. That's quickly becoming one of my favorite colors to use. My yellow ochre is also made by Holbein. The rest of them are all Winsor & Newton. So I'm mixing a large puddle of middle value Payne's Gray. And I'm gonna just keep reloading my brush from that one puddle when I do my value study and just painting around those light shapes. And again, like I said, what this is gonna do is just kind of simplify a fairly complicated scene in my mind's eye into two large stages, the lights and that first large middle value shape. Now I'll do the details, the dark details later on the value study, but I'm going to first order of business is tackling these first two large washes. Okay, that should be enough to connect everything here. All right. So stand up when I do this. I'm going to leave those little patches of um, dirt on the background hill. I'm going to leave that white paper as well. So I'm kind of connect the trees coming across right into the boat, into that foreground area. That'll help to connect the trees, will help to define the sailboat. But it's those trees in the background and connect right into this. That'll be a nice connection, this boat overlapping. And even this large post here is going to help connect background to middle ground to foreground for me. Okay, so trees in the background. See, it feels a little too dark. And like I said, that can even connect up to this thing here and help show the form of that. And they are going to help to define my sailboat a little bit here. Coming right up to that. Like so. And that's going to connect in between the two sails, like so. There's a little cast shadow on that one too, down into the boat here. And into the water a bit. There's a little bit of some darker water out here as well. So those trees are going to help to define and separate the sails out. Coming across here, another little break in the action. Right into the boat. Another bit of that hillside up above there. And it's going to come right into the shadow side of my boat and connect to that. A little bit of light on the rim there. And this is in the shadow area. This is a cast shadow from that post here. And that's going to connect up into this area of the boat, the cabin up above. And that is going to connect down into here. Reload my brush. All of this is in shadow. I'm going to paint right through that figure washing the side of the boat. Don't paint around or your dark areas, paint right through them. And painting right through that van for the most part as well. That's mostly going to be dark later. There's a couple little light spots of things in the back of the open hatch of the van there. Some of the windows are going to be lighter, like I said. The van itself is connecting down with the tires and the shadow underneath it, like so. And that is kind of connecting to the back end of the boat back here, that big shadow coming down on the back end of it. And we've got some grasses and things. Okay, that is going to keep connecting over through this figure. There's a little bit of light on that figure's face, so I'm going to try and paint around that a bit. But the rest of that figure is dark. Here's that little pail that they're using. Okay, now we've got some grass that's coming over and connecting with this figure. And this figure is mostly going to be backlit, but we've got some grass there to help to define those lighter legs. This figure is mostly backlit, but again, maybe a little bit of his legs are showing through with the shadows and the grass. Okay, that's connecting over here. Got to work fast and simplify, but it's amazing how this quick kind of abstract shape quickly becomes something in the viewer's mind. We start to see these shapes already forming and making sense. What that does is it tells me I don't need to rely on a ton of details to make this. It can stay nice and loose and fresh. The grass over here, I'm going to get rid of that post because I moved that sailboat over. That's going to be a bad tangent or something that's going to take away from it, so I'm not even going to put that one in there. Got all this mud coming across the walkway here with some lights again that I'm going to try and preserve. Maybe there's another boats and things back here in the distance, just a couple. All right, so that is my big abstract connected shape. And like I said, even just from that, no color, no detail, nothing going on in there, but you can already get a sense of what's happening in that scene, okay, in the viewer's mind. Now, obviously, we don't know time of day or season or anything like that, but you've got them convinced that they're already looking at kind of a nautical scene with the sailboat, another large boat, probably some figures standing there. Okay, so I'm going to try and keep my color version down to that same large simplicity. Now, I used to finish my value studies completely before I would move on to the actual painting. But I found that this is by far, I think, the most difficult stage of the painting, that middle value stage. The light wash, I kind of wet the paper. Everything is flowing together. You're not painting any details. That's all fun. You're just kind of putting down local color and getting rid of the white of the paper. But now at this stage, I'm actually starting to paint objects in my painting. And it's real easy for your mind to not see the connections and only see the separations at this stage. So you're seeing this collection, like I said, of 38 separate shapes and not one large shape that you can connect by thinking about value. So if I come back in here and put all those details in, it muddies the water, so to speak, and makes it visually confusing. So what I do now is I get this first big connected stage of my value study in, a large abstract shape, and then I use that to guide my first two large washes of the painting, the light wash and that first large middle value connected shape. And then I come back to the value study afterwards and work through some of those dark details. That makes a big difference when you put those darks on, right? Everything kind of makes sense again and comes to play. But if I start putting all those on, it's hard to remember, where that big middle value shape was underneath it all when I'm working on my color painting. So before I finish my value study, I get this on my value study and just switch gears to the color painting. All right, so now I'm gonna have two all-important references here for my color painting, my value study, and the actual reference photograph. Okay. So I'm going to do the same process here. I've already kind of blocked it in lightly on my paper, so I'll go back in and darken this up, my pencil marks a little bit. And once again, I've already started to put that sailboat in, but I'm going to move it over to the left here a bit. My color version. Okay, so I want my sailboat to be right about over here, I guess. Maybe right above that little walkway up to the, and then this thing can come this way. So, and it's leaning in. All right, that's a little better. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and darken everything up now for the most part. Here's the short distance shoreline. Gonna have this hole coming up like so. And just block in very lightly where my distant hillside is. I want the freedom to just kind of paint those trees wherever I want them. That's where they're going to be. So I don't need to get too involved there. Just make sure I have a little variety in heights and things like that. The other part of the distant shoreline coming over, I want to make sure I get those important sails in here. On the front end of my boat, like so. Coming back here. All right. And that's going to come close to this, but not quite. It's going to connect to the foreground grasses. Here's my figures now. There's two kind of overlapping figures here, but I'm going to narrow it down to one in this area. And I'll put the other two chaps off to the side. Connected here. Righty. It's fun to paint these smaller figures into the landscapes. You don't need to put too much detail on them. He's got some dark boots on. They both do. All right, now I'm into the side of the boat. So keeping the pencil on the paper all the time, trying to make these connections right at the drawing stage already, one shape to the next shape to the next shape. Something's going to be quite dark later. I go ahead and draw it fairly dark. I don't want to lose that pencil mark when I go put some color on here. So I just go ahead and really go dark with some of these initial pencil marks. Like I said, if I know it's going to be quite a bit darker later anyways, why not? I've seen that happen to a lot of my students' work. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't see my drawing anymore. Like, yes, aren't you glad you spent 45 minutes drawing that? Only to have it disappear. This is kind of a fun little connecting shape coming down here towards the figures as well. That little angled thing. Right, now we've got two people working on the boat here, again, paying attention to the heights of their heads a little bit. A little bit slightly taller one next to him. Okay, and the little bucket that they're working with here. Front end of the vehicle now. A lot to do, a lot to draw, but I'm trying to, didn't want to have it pre-drawn. I think it's important to see already, this is part of the painting process too, how I'm simplifying things. So, and it doesn't take me too long to draw things. So I'm trying to make sure to keep that as part of the demo also. I know you'd rather just see me paint, but I'll get to that soon. There's the back end of it, tires. A little bit closer to us than the people are. And the boat in the background. Okay, and then this is all just puddles and things. I don't really need to draw all of that either. I can just stay as it is. Here's the little walkway going out. Edge of that coming down here. Little channel. And the rest of the grass. And there's just a couple little peripheral boats out in the distance here. I'll just indicate where those are for now. So some colors and things. Okay. My drawing's all done. Again, I got fairly dark with my drawing over here. Now I'm going to take a kneaded eraser and go over the drawing just very lightly with a kneaded eraser, get rid of some of those initial lines, take some of the excess graphite off. So when I wet my paper for the color version, I'm not spreading graphite all over. And I can still see my drawing. Plenty good enough. All right, there we have it. So now what I'm going to do is wet both sides of my paper. I want the paper to stay damp long enough for me to get that first initial wash in without getting any hard edges, hopefully. So I like to wet the paper just slightly first. Everything down so you can see it all. Hopefully you can see as much as possible here. Okay, and then my first light wash, I'm just going to be basically just getting rid of the white of the paper unless I want something to stay white, which I do in this instance. The sails, maybe a couple of little spotty things on the boats, this little bucket and the top of this boat can stay white paper. So when I wet the front of my paper, I'm going to avoid wetting into those areas. But I wet both sides. I'm going to take a sponge here, a natural sponge. Wet the back of the paper entirely. This is just a quarter sheet of Saunders 140-pound rough paper. Become my preferred paper over the years. I used to paint on Arch paper, and then they started to have a little bit of quality control problems. I would get sheets of paper and the sizing was poor and stuff. I stopped relying on it entirely. I still use blocks of Arch paper for plein air and stuff, but in the studio, I've pretty much stuck to the Saunders rough now. I like it's got a softer texture to it than the Arch and a lot of other papers, which I kind of prefer on my work. So this is another reason why I wet both sides. You wet just one side and it starts to curl up. I don't tape my paper down or anything to the table. So to avoid some of this curling that happens and to keep the paper damp a little longer, I just wet both sides of it. And it'll lay flat on my table. All right, so again, now when I'm doing this, I want to avoid the areas of my scene that are going to remain white. There, down here on my sailboat. All of this has some color to it. This mostly has color on it. Nothing really white over here on the back end of the boat. That gentleman's hair is darker. Okay. Yeah, the boat itself has some more tone down here. It's just way up on the top that has some white on it. Again, I'm going to avoid painting into my little sailboat there. The water can have some tone on it though. And I'll avoid a couple areas where these lighter white boats are in the distance. And a lot of the whites up here. Okay. Should be pretty good to go. Go over it one more time here. Get some of that excess water off with my sponge. Want to get a nice crisp white edge there. All right. Things tend to dry out more often than not. That's the bigger complaint that I hear from students is, oh, everything dried on me too fast. You know, so it is helpful to wet both sides, I think. Gives you that little extra time before you lost it all. Get everything on. Okay, good enough. Forgot about my coffee. 4:30 in the morning. Mm. Ah. Once I get into the painting though, time is irrelevant. Okay, let me get some of that water off of my table, clean my palette up a bit, get all that painted gray off of my palette. All right, So again, this first order of business now on my color painting is just getting rid of the white paper. So I'm using the value study to refer to, even though I'm not painting that one large connected shape quite yet. But it's still informing my decisions because I'm trying to keep things nice and loose and literally I just want just white areas of paper to have some of these colors on. The blue of the sky, the blue of the water, reflected down here, some of the sandy tone, the color of the mud, some blue reflecting in the puddles. All that stuff is just going to be dropped in here, some lighter colors on the figures, of course, and maybe on the boats in the back of the van. But most of this first wash is going to be a lot of blue and tan and brown just to set the stage. All right. I'm going to go ahead and start with that warmer color before I do the sky. It doesn't matter what I start with at this point of the painting because again, I'm not painting any objects. I'm just toning the whole paper down. So everything is wet. So I can kind of jump around and do whatever I need to do here. I could have started with the sky. It doesn't matter. I'm going to fill in this little walkway here first. Get some of that warmer tone in here. Okay. Can drop in some mud too and darken it up just a little bit. I'm going to add some burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, and some cerulean blue to this mixture just to kind of make it a little bit more of a violety color. And get some mud over here. Want to leave a few spots behind for some of the puddles, the blue sky reflecting through as well. I want that to be dark enough to really kind of pop out that little white pail, the little bucket. Okay, so I've got some dirt in there. That'll work. Maybe a little bit over here on the side of that as well. Okay, so most of this is filled in. This is filled in. I'm starting to fill in a little bit over here. A little smaller brush. There's some warm color on the back of that chap's paints. Here, I want to get that color in. And maybe even a little bit of this gentleman's face. Get some of those warmer colors on where I need it. That's all. This other gentleman is all in shadow, so I don't have to worry too much about him. And these people have some lighter colors on their faces, though. I want to drop a little bit of that in if I can. Right now, that kind of bleed down in here. Okay, so those little light areas are also filled in now. Maybe a little bit of pale blue even on their jeans, just very lightly if I leave a lighter shape on one or two of those areas. So I could put some of that in for now. Same thing in the little light reflected areas on my vehicle. Can drop some of that in. Make sure I've got a little bit of color there. Want to leave some little white bits for a couple things in the back. I'm going to go ahead and start some tone on the back end of that boat. Even though I know I did a lot of it in the middle value on the actual painting, but I want to kind of soften it a little bit as it comes to the back end here. So I'm going to start to put some of that in here in my light wash right away to help make the back end of that boat look a little more round. Need to tone it down a bit. It's not quite white paper back there. There we go. A little white shape in the back there. Same thing up here. I'm going to get a little stripe of that red above here. Back end there. get that started anyways. It's a little warmer than that. Got that color up here. And I'm trying to let things fuzz together, okay? After this, beyond this point, everything gets tighter and tighter and more defined. So if I can let some things blur together at this stage of the game, that's wonderful. I want to have my paintings have a nice combination of lost and found edges. Okay, so again, this is filled in. This is filled in. Some of that, I got to get the water in here yet. This is starting to get filled in. That's starting to get filled in. This is starting to get filled in. Okay, this is going to stay white paper, so I don't need to worry about that just yet. I am going to connect some of this up here though, just a little bit here, just like I did before. Take the edge off. That to stay white paper. Okay, I think I can switch to blues and get my sky and water bits in here. I don't want to lose too much of what's going on down below. I want a little bit of that sky showing through, so I'm going to come in with some blue lavender, some cobalt blue, cerulean blue, lavender, and start to get some of that water in down below here. Now this is going to be reflecting the white of the boat, so I don't need to get too much down there. Over here, we've got some more blue reflecting puddles, a bit more in here under the figures. Coming across here, and then I've got this channel coming alongside the walkway. That's going to have reflecting the sky as well, that water, and some of that water creeping over this area too. So now that's filled in. The rest of this is all filled in. There's no real white down here other than down right. I don't might be want a white right in the corner of the painting though. So I'm going to cover that up a bit more. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and get my sky wash in here. I want that sky nice and strong so it helps to pop the white of the boat out. I'm going to mix again some cobalt, some cerulean, and some lavender all together on my palette here. The nice strong violety blue. Maybe even a little rose into it. It's quite a strong color in that sky. It's an intense blue, so I know when I first put it on, it looks maybe way too dark. But after it's had a chance to dry and lighten a bit, and I put my actual middle values on, it won't seem quite this dark, relatively speaking. That's another very difficult thing, it seems, when people first start painting in watercolor, is getting used to how much things dry lighter. They put their washes on, especially this early wash, so it looks just the way it's supposed to look, and not realizing that when it's dried, it might be almost two values lighter than what you put it on. So they're disappointed, and you have to glaze over it to get it as dark as you want it. So I try not to glaze over things too many times if I can avoid it. I try and keep things nice and fresh, if at all possible. So getting those values on here properly the first time helps. I'm gonna leave a little spot here for that little red canister up there. I'm gonna start carrying this down into the trees just a little bit. Now this is going to go right through that pole coming up there. I can go nice and strong with it on the side of the boat here. And again, this is going to help to really pop out the light on the boat. Nice and strong with everything. That can start to come into the boat too, even though I'm going to have some of those shadows in my middle value, but I'm gonna go ahead and drop some of this in right now to connect it. I don't need to surround the entire boat, only the white parts. And go a bit stronger with the other areas. Okay, so it's already, my sky is starting to come in and connect with everything. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and fill in the water, and then the last thing I'm gonna have to do is fill in the hillside in the background. And again, I want my water to be strong enough to pop the little light boats out. Water's a little bit more of a cerulean color, turquoisey blue. It's not quite as violet-y as the sky. Actually, I should switch to a little smaller brush for this. Okay, that boat is, I don't have to worry about painting around the sailboat at all, just the sails. A little bit on the top of it there. You can paint right through that post. I'm gonna bring some of that water down into the foreground here too for the wet foreground. Same thing here, maybe some water coming down into that area. Got a couple of other lighter boats out here that I want to paint around. They're so slightly. Right through the figure's head here. Can connect into that figure. Okay. Paint around this one. All right, got that in. I can go ahead right into the shadow side of that boat too. I just wanted to see if I could avoid that little, this thing going up the side here. Paint around that gentleman's head. All of this is going to be darker later anyway, so I don't have to worry about it. Okay, last thing I'm going to need to do is get the hills in. I'll be done with that light wash. I should have done that when I had all my warm colors out there. Missed it. I don't want those too warm. They're back in the distance, so I'm gonna mix some lavender and neutral tint into those hillside colors a bit. But that also needs to be filled in. I'm gonna let that connect with my sky. I'm gonna have those trees making the separation later. Do want that little red post, so I'm gonna try and get around that just a bit. I have to paint around these sails twice, once with the hills and once with the trees. But that's okay. It's okay again if this starts to blur into the water a little bit. It'll give me a little natural reflection or something into the thing, so I don't worry about that either. Alrighty. That is my first light wash for the most part. This is filled in with that violety blue sky. This is filled in with that sandy color. This was left white paper for the sails. This was left white paper. That was toned just a little bit. It's not as white as the rest of the scene, or the rest of the boat, I'm sorry. These little bits are filled in. There's a little bit more of a stronger blue in this windows here I wanted to get in. So that's filled in. This is filled in. All the mud is filled in and water down below. That walkway is filled in. That water is filled in. All this water is filled in. That's left white. That's left white. Little touches of color for their hair and their faces and things in here. But otherwise, pretty much everything else has a tone on it. Does that make sense? I hope. Any questions at that stage of the game? Has anybody typed anything in, or anybody has anything they want to ask? I want to let this dry just a little bit before I put my hit it with a hairdryer and put my middle values on.
Okay, you understand we get told to turn our mute on while you're working so there's no feedback from anything else that's going on. So if you haven't got any answers, that's why, because we've all turned our volume off. But it's looking good.
So the paper is still fairly wet?
Hmm?
The paper is still fairly wet?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, I wet both sides of it and I just put a bunch of light, watery washes on it. So it's going to stay damp for a while. I'm going to have to hit it with a hair dryer when I want to go to my middle values, but I like to let it dry naturally at least a little bit. So that's why I figured if there were any questions now, I could answer some of those.
Andy, my name's Sade. Nice to meet you. Thank you for this. I just wanted to confirm that was Saunders Waterford. Did you say that was cold press or hot press?
It's rough, actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
is it? Right, okay. Sorry, I've
So,
got a very small screen, so I can't really.
yeah, Saunders is very soft paper. In fact, it's funny. I just taught a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and one of my students had a block of Saunders Waterford, and it was cold press. And he brought it up to me, and he was like, "I should have got rough. I know you said you use rough, but I got cold, and it was almost completely smooth. It hardly had any texture like a hot press paper. I couldn't believe. I'm like, this is cold press." So yeah, he was really disappointed in the surface of that block. So I mean, I think even Saunders Rough doesn't have quite as much texture as most other papers cold press.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. That was it. That's the only question.
Well,
All
I've
right.
got one.
Andy, it's Jane here. We have 104 people watching your demonstration.
Wow. Wow. I wasn't nervous before. Now I am. That's great. Thanks, everyone. Wonderful. 104 people. Wow. Very nice. Sounds like you have a good active society there then. I think I used to be president of the Minnesota Watercolor Society, and I don't get to too many meetings anymore. I'm on the road so often, and so I haven't attended in quite some time. But when I was president, it sounded like we had about the same amount of members as you all have, between 300 and 400. Um, Same thing. It was nice. It's nice to have these monthly meetings and demonstrations and get opportunities for exhibitions and paint outs and things like that. Being an artist can be a little bit lonely and isolating at times, so to have a community like that where you can get together and meet people, like-minded people, I think is important. Okay, my apologies, but I'm gonna have to hit this with a hairdryer. I'm gonna mute myself so you don't have to listen to that annoying sound. I'll be right back.
Is everyone in Melbourne?
Yeah, I'm in Melbourne.
We're in the
Sydney.
Port Macquarie. Someone talking on the phone needs to mute, please.
I just muted them for them, okay?
Someone's having a conversation, yes.
No, I just did some, was it higher order muting?
I wonder how many artists would be willing to get up at 4:30 in the morning to do this demo.
Yay. So you can tell, so one of the reasons why I don't like to use a hair dryer and just let things dry naturally is a lot of times in that first wash, you start to get some streaks and things in your washes. And if you just let it dry naturally and things settle on their own, it doesn't, a lot of times those things will go away. I don't see a lot in here, but it does help. And a lot of my pigments that I use, like cerulean blue and alizarin crimson, are a little bit more granulating. And if you just let things dry on their own, you get some of that granulation happening when the wash is dry also. But in this, I mean, it's fine. Everything is okay. But that's just one of the reasons why I prefer to let things dry on their own and not use a hair dryer. But you can already tell things have dried a little bit lighter than when I put them on, okay, on this wash. And they'll really, when I start putting my mid values on here, you'll see the difference as well. So now what I need to do is kind of copy this shape. I'm going to use my map again, and I know I used it for this light wash too to remind myself. All I'm doing in this stage is just getting rid of these white areas unless I wanted it to stay white. So everything is loose, whoops, buzzing, soft edged. Now I'm going to try and connect a lot of these shapes together, but the paper needs to be fairly dry because now I'm defining some things, okay? I want these edges to stay put. I don't want my boat to blur into nothing. I don't want to lose the edge of the water, my figures and whatnot. So now my paper is fairly dry. So I'm going to go ahead and start the same area that I did before. I'm going to start with my trees in the background and define the hills and come in, and then it's going to join right into the boat, and I'll start working my way down this way and just keep changing the color on my brush as I go. I'm going to get a few of these colors pre-mixed though on my palette, so I don't have to take a lot of time in between mixing what I need. I want to be able to just kind of keep going to the palette, cleaning my brush off a little bit, grabbing a new color once in a while. But timing is really important at this stage. You've got to be decisive, or you're going to start getting blooms and hard edges before you want them. So I want to be able to just kind of keep cleaning my brush off, grabbing a new color, move across the paper. So I like to get a few of these greens mixed maybe and get some of the colors to get that side of that boat mixed, that color that I need. It's kind of got, it's blue, but not too blue. It's got a little bit of neutral tint in it. Again, it's a little bit of a violety blue, much like the sky. So I'm gonna have some of that color mixed, start ready to go. All right, that's going to get me down all the way across here with the trees and down into here. And then once I come in here, I'll be doing the grass and things so I can mix stronger greens when I get to that point. But for now, I think I'm going to be okay. These background hills. All right. My paper's fairly dry, so I'm going to start. I don't want to go as dark on the trees as they are in the reference photograph. I want to try and reserve my darkest darks for in the foreground area. Okay, I know in the reference photograph these trees are almost as dark as my people, my figures, but in order to kind of help establish some depth to the scene, I want to try and keep my trees maybe a darker middle value, but not as dark as what they are here. I want them to just kind of merge in with the boat if at all possible. So, all righty. Have at it. I'm gonna go ahead and start creating my hillsides, get some little variety in the heights of these trees here. Create the top of the hillside like so. I'll take a little bit more care on this than I did on the value study, but not much, all right? This is, again, one of those things that I see a lot when I teach my workshops is the students have these brilliant little value studies and they're reading so nicely. And then when they go to the color painting, they just beat it to death, try and make it that much better, and it just gets that much worse. Try and keep that same freshness that you managed to get on the value study. That's the whole point of it. and easier said than done, I know, but that's what I'm trying to impart on them anyways. Okay, I want to paint around this little guy a bit again if I can. Want that tree to connect and come over to the other side. I'm gonna have to get some red in there quickly so that it merges a bit. And this is gonna help to define my sails. I want to get a little bit of that red in right away if I can. Let that kind of fuzz. Should have put a bit of that in the light wash. Let that just merge with it. There we go. That's fine. When it comes down there, it gets darker anyways. Back to the trees. Okay, now these trees are going to really help to define my sailboat. So, top of it. I don't want to make it too obvious that I'm surrounding that sailboat, so I don't want to make that tree taller right there over the top of it to make it, like I said, too obvious that you're using the trees to define it. So paying attention to the shape is important. Make sure that these trees make sense coming through on the opposite side of the sailboat. Continuing over. A little bit more down below there. I'm going to add a bit of variety into the value of them real quickly while it's still wet. Just give them a couple of darker shadows here and there. Make some separations out. Because I don't want to come in and put too many details in after the fact. Like I said, I want to make sure that these trees read for the most part as just middle value in the background. Okay. All right, continuing over again. These other little masts and things that I'm seeing from a couple other boats, I'm not gonna worry too much about. I can scratch them out or put them in with gouache or something if I have to. Already, and this might look a little strong on your screens, but this isn't that strong of a middle value. And look how much lighter the light wash looks compared to this. That's why I need to go nice and strong with that first light wash and make sure that I'm not having to glaze over my sky multiple times to get the value that I want. All right, this is going to join right in with my boat now. So I'm going to clean that off, dry it off, and get my value for the shadow side of the boat and just start joining it all in here. That might be a little too strong. Get that nice strong shadow in here. Want it to be that same shape. Oh, go ahead. Did you have a question? All right, continuing down here again, a little bit stronger with that value. And I'm going to soften it as it comes around. I want to make this look round. So I'm going to soften that edge just a little bit as it comes to the back here. And that's going to drop down into the cabin windows and things. I'm going to throw some brown in here soon as well. And it's going to connect here into this shape. There's some more stuff up here. Same thing that I did here. All right, continue on down the side of the boat here now. Want to leave that little strip of light on the red there and on that little stick or whatever they're using. Going up the side of the boat, leave that as well. If I can paint around it. Again, I could have put that in with gouache or scratching it out or something, but if I can put it in right now, start to indicate it, all the better. I've got a nice lost edge here between my trees and the boat. That's what I want. Continuing on down, following my map, my value study, trying to keep things nice and big and fresh. Okay, here's that nice crisp shadow coming down here now on the front of the boat. A little porthole. Here's the shadow from mooring chain and stuff, and it's going to come right down and connect into my van. To that shape. Like so. Just so much more fun to paint for me anyways when I'm not sweating all the details. I like to keep it nice and big and fresh. I'm gonna paint around the gentleman's face, is just catching some sun there a little bit and a little bit on his shoulder. Otherwise he's entirely in the shadow there. And this gentleman's entirely in the shadow. Okay, now I need to paint around a little bit of the windows in my van here, catching the reflection of the sky. And the little rear view, side view mirror, maybe a little bit of the highlights on the side of the van. But the rest of it, for the most part, is in shadow here. Till I get to the back end. There's a couple little bits in the back end. I'll zoom in a minute here for you so you can see it a little bit better, but I want you to be able to compare it to the value study, because that's what I'm looking at a lot. Same thing. A little bit of light on the rear end. And this is continuing down. All this is going to come right down and help really kind of pop out that little bucket. Okay, the tires on the van coming down like so, the shadow underneath it. Other front tire, back tire right here. There's some browns and stuff on the other side connecting to the rear end of the boat, some rust over here. I want to get some of that up as well. A couple other small lines that's connecting to the shadow of that red there. I want to go a little bit stronger with that red, the shadow side of that back end here. Get some of that over here as well. Okay, just dropping that in, let it fuzz. Okay, I've got my trees in, I've got my boat, all the middle values of the boat for the most part, through the van, through those figures. Now I'm into this area, so I need to start getting my green, the grass. I've already got some of those greens from the hills. I'm obviously making this green a little bit stronger. And in the background. Okay, I want to touch that bead here, see if I can join it with my boat right away. And into this area. And that's going to help to define this figure's legs, that stronger grass, like so. And there's some mud going on there. I need to connect my figures real quickly to through here. I've got a lot of just blues and violets and stuff on. Put a little bit of red on this guy's shirt maybe. Instead of another blue, we've got enough blue in this scene already. And this gentleman's shirt can merge with it as well. Down into his pants. I want to leave some light on his pants though from that first wash. And this figure, okay. I want to get the shadow of that figure's legs coming in here at the same time and just kind of merge all that in. All right, this figure is mostly darker, so I can kind of paint right through most of him. Connect back to the greens again. So I'm just going to zoom in real quickly here for you so you can start to see some of those connecting colors. Again, that's what I want to, I'm trying to make it look realistic, obviously, but I'm also trying to make it look like a painting. So the more I can lose edges at this early stage, keep it a little bit more impressionistic, the more it's going to look like a painting and less like just a rendering or a copy of the photograph. And those lost edges are where the charm of watercolor really shines, I think. All right, back to that green behind him. Can paint for the most part. I can kind of paint right through that post here. Some of that is going to connect in as well, what I just did. Gonna change that color on my brush here also. I know that looks fairly dark. I'll put in, that's one of the closest shapes. All right, got more green coming down here. I just need to leave some of those little highlights behind for some of the wet mud. Want that green grass to kind of merge with some of the mud too, and in a couple areas. So I think pretty soon I'm going to start dropping that in, another color mixed in with everything. I want just a little stronger version of that mud. That kind of merge in a couple of spots here. Because that's what's helping to pop out my puddles also, is that little stronger bit of mud. So I can leave some of the wet, those lighter areas shining through from the previous wash where the blue is. That helps to merge all that together also. And it'll help to pop out my little white bucket. Bit more of the reflections here. Some fun stuff to paint. So big brush strokes. Join it here too. I want this little walkway to be slightly lighter than the mud also. Now I'm going to be back to green here pretty soon. I'm going to get a little bit more mud coming this way before I lose my wet edge. I want that to be mud along the riverbank, or the riverbank, the little channel here. Back to the greens. The greens start merging with this here too. All about merging and connecting and working from a wet edge. That's why I wanted to get some of those colors out on my palette before I started this. Make sure I could work quickly enough. Got some nice bright water down here. The puddles I want to leave behind, reflecting that little post. And that's why I don't draw all this stuff. It's important to just have the freedom to just make these brush strokes. I don't want to have to fill in pre-drawn puddles. Doesn't matter where they are really. Wherever I put them, that's where they are. So leave myself the freedom to just paint these things nice and quickly and freely. And pull my brush down to show that it's bending down towards this little area, the mud. So Get that reflection of the post in here at the same time, that kind of merge with everything else. And maybe a reflection of one of the figures or two where there's a puddle here. Make sure that that's part of this also. So many things to think about. Even on the side of the boat, reflecting down into this puddle on the edge down below in that corner. So some of these darker areas in water. Yes, I can come back in my dark stage and put all this in, but I want some of it to merge right now if possible. That van, everything merging down here. All righty. That's a lot to tackle. And to think that I could do all of this without having a clear idea in my mind's eye what I need to put and where through that value study is it's kind of foolhardy. There's no way I would get lost in the details so quickly if I didn't have this initial guiding light to keep me on point and make sure that I'm keeping things nice and big and fresh. This wet stuff here too. I want to go too warm with that. That's looking a little too brown. That's helping to really pop out the edge of that little channel of water going out there. So I want that to be good, dark enough going across. Pop all that out. Last thing I need to do, and they're not really connected much, is the boats out in the water with a little bit of darker water and get some tone on them. So I've got a little bit of there's some darker water out there too, kind of scudding across. It's not all just this flat, so I can do some dry brushing for that. Not quite that dry. My blues are all getting towards green for some reason. Okay. That slightly darker water will help to pop out the boats again a little bit more. Back into here again too. Got a little shadow on the front end of that one. Okay, they're popping a little bit more as well. Go a little stronger with that cerulean on my sailboat. Right away. Be on the front end of that one. There's a little bit of red out there too. Sail on that one, it's a bit brighter. And okay. There you have it. Comparing that shape to the shape that I found on my value study, they're very similar. Okay. Obviously a bit more care and some of the larger areas of the shapes, but not that much different. Oops, one thing I didn't do, and I'm looking up here, I want that shadow on the sail, that middle sail. It's important. Give that some form as well, the cast shadow from the one sail onto the other one here. That was just too flat. All right, so there's the big middle value stage. I'm going to zoom in on that one more time here for you. You can see all the connections. Obviously, the darks will make a difference as well with the figures in the van and, you know, some of the details on the boat. But I'm going to try when I put those darks in now to keep them around this area, you know, a little bit over here for some detail. But the background, for the most part, is done. I want that to sit back and remain mostly middle value. Do we have any questions at this point?
Don't think so, but it's coming along beautifully.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears and go back to the value study and just kind of work through some of those important darks on there. And, you know, the nice thing about doing the value study, the way I like to paint them, because, you know, these negative shapes are so important with watercolor. It's unique to our media. This is the only transparent medium, really. All the other media are at least semi-opaque, if not entirely opaque. So watercolor is the only medium where you don't paint your lights. You create your light shapes by painting darker shapes around them. Okay, I'm creating these puddles by painting the grass and the mud around them. I'm creating the sails by painting trees around them. So by painting my value study, it was a little bit of a nice warm-up for me. Going into the color painting, so that this wasn't the first time I created those shapes. And it's just going to be the same thing with the darks. It gives me a chance to kind of practice painting those figures and putting in some of the small details. And sometimes you carry that stage of the painting too far, the darks, and put too much in and you lose the freshness. So again, by trying to just work through those issues on the value study and find the important darks and leave the rest of it to the viewer's mind, that's an important stage as well. Okay, so this is the most difficult stage, the big connected shape, like I said, because this, for the first time now, you're taking all this stuff in the scene, everything in the scene, and trying to make it as one continuous shape. That's really difficult to do, because our brains want to see the separations and the details, so you're always fighting that, you know, that proclivity of your brain to trick you into painting too much. So now that I've got that big shape on there, and it's obviously it's reading, you know, fairly well at this point because of all the color shifts. I don't have that in the value study, but it still needs some work. It still needs some of the details. So set that aside and start working through some of those on my value study first. Zoom in just a little bit more here for you. Okay, so I'm going to start with my largest shapes, the boats and the van and the people here, and then work my way back and see what else I need eventually, if anything. Back to Payne's Gray. Now I'm using a smaller synthetic brush. I like these little Escoda Perlas. They're good synthetic brushes. So I use natural brushes for those earlier stages because I'm trying to keep everything, you know, especially for that first light wash, I'm using like a squirrel mop. I'm not worried about any details. That second stage, I'm usually using kind of a sable type brush, back and forth. It's still mostly kind of a softer natural brush because I want to keep a nice bead going. And now for the details, I'll use something synthetic and a little bit more stiff with a point so I can create some of those defined shapes. I wanted to take a photograph of these stages. Bear with me. I can do my social media post afterwards. Shout out to the Victoria Watercolour Society.
But enjoy seeing it.
Okay.
Andy, it's Rob Candy. Have you got a moment to talk about composition? What drew you to this scene?
Yes. So I loved the little collection of figures here by the side of the boat. Okay. And now one of the main rules that I adhere to compositionally is that rule of thirds. Okay. So you want to make sure, you know, the star of your show is somewhere. If you divide your paper, left to right, you know, third, and then top to bottom thirds. Those little intersections are the areas where you want to place some of your main areas of interest, right? So this little group gathering of figures here, we're working on the side of the boat, are right there at that intersection of the bottom right third. So that compositionally, that drew me to it. It's just it's a collection of interesting shapes. I don't like the term focal point. It makes it sound like there's one point in your painting that's important and the rest of it is just there to, you know, support it. I call them areas of interest. I like it when the painting, you know, as the viewer's eye travels through, you can stop here and there's something interesting, and then travel along and there's another small thing, and then maybe go on and there's something else. Okay, I don't want it so obvious to be, you know, one little area that's there and the rest of the painting is just meaningless. So it's okay if there's a sailboat in the background. You know, it's okay if this, you know, might gather a little bit more attention or whatever. But I just like the obvious sense of light, the big interesting shapes that I could find in it. And yeah, it's not what you paint really, it's how you paint it, I think. And you know, too often when I started to paint, I was always looking for these amazing scenes to paint. And more often than not, I would just come back frustrated because I didn't find something paintable, you know, something that was going to make a great scene. And the more I paint, the more I realize that it's not, I kind of enjoy these little everyday slices of life, things that are happening around us, and, you know, and try and paint them in a nice loose manner and inject some life into it. And like I said, just kind of make it look like a painting and not a faithful rendering of the scene or anything. So, and then all of a sudden, once I realized that, then the whole world opened up, and there's paintings everywhere I look. I see interesting things to paint in my mind's eye, anyways. So. All righty. So I've got some little dark details on my boat up here. Here in the cabin. I've got these windows. I'm gonna try and keep those not too obtrusive. Windows can really start to take over a scene if you overdo them. So I'm gonna try and keep them just to a bare minimum of detail. And then I've got this dark shape down below here. Coming down the side, we've got a couple little numbers and lettering, which again, I don't want to really put too much emphasis on. And another little dark shape here on the side of the boat. And then we've got that darker shape down below here. On the side like that, soften it up a little bit. So it comes over there. I don't really need to worry too much about it on the value study, but it's there. Okay,
So you're constantly checking your values by going back to the draft one.
Yep. Well, right now I'm on my little draft, the value study. But so when I'm working on my painting, I keep going back, looking at the value study. I have it right there,
Yeah.
next to me to make sure I'm not straying too much and putting too many details into the thing. Yeah.
I do like how fresh and energetic it is. So
I'm
far.
sorry. What's that?
So far, I'm enjoying how fresh and energetic it is.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, and again, I appreciate that. That's what I'm going for. I want it to keep it nice and fresh. It's so easy to get sucked into too many details. Um, and it's to be honest, it's not necessary. It's amazing how much the viewer's brain fills in the gaps when you have all the big shapes correct for them. They see everything in that scene without me painting everything in that scene. So trying to keep things nice and big and fresh, give them enough information to set the stage, and then letting their brains fill in the rest. And all of that is part of the loose painting process. If everything is spelled out accurately, you know, completely, everybody sees the same thing. your painting. And I like it when everybody, you know, if people look at it and they see something a little bit different, maybe relying on their own experiences and places they've been. A little bit of a darker shape on the bottom there to help pop the back end of the van out. Okay. All right. So some of those all important darker shapes are in here now. Starting to get more and more definition all the time. Here's my little bucket. Here's a darker shadow being cast from the ship. And that's going to really help to pop out these figures now. Okay, a little bit of a darker shape there. She's got some darker hair. On the back, this figure is quite a bit darker than the background here. He's got a backpack on that's a little bit lighter, but much of him is darker than the water in the background. And his jeans, and they've got these dark boots on. This figure again is a bit darker than the background. Darken up his boots, give them a little shadow coming out here, more of a shadow from the boat. Okay, so that contrast visually, now all that comes forward. So that's why I didn't want to put too many darks in the trees in the background. I'm trying to create some of that spatial depth in the scene. So try and reserve that, even though the reference photograph, yes, has dark trees and you can see details back there, but visually in my painting, I don't want to put too much of that in there. I'm trying to reserve all that for in the foreground as much as I can. Okay, there's a little bit darker reflections again. I put some of that in, obviously, in my painting already, but I'm gonna have to put a little bit of that in here. Some of those edges up in the water. Okay, I left that post out so I don't have to worry about that. This other one has a little bit of a darker side to it here up on the top, and I can darken up the bottom of it as it's coming down here, helping to define that little edge. We've got a little bit of a darker shape along that edge also here. Just a couple of dark details in that foreground area, not too much. Some dry brushing on the grass maybe to show the angle coming down to the water. And not going to want too much more than that. A little bit of a darker shadow in the front of the main boat, maybe just a couple back here. But for the most part, that's going to be the value study now and bring it all home. So a lot of implied detail, just quick little brush strokes and marks. But again, I want my scene to look like a painting, not a faithful rendering, a little porthole. Just a few other small shapes here and there. Okay, so now I'm going to try and find a lot of those same shapes on my color version. Zoom out just a bit again. I should be able to see all three if possible, as much as possible. Okay. All righty, so I'm going to start right away on my boat. I want to get that kind of that mahogany color of the windows up above here. And I want to try and treat this as closely as I can, the same simplicity that I put into the value study, and just not overwork things too much. Okay, got that little dark window on the side here. as well. A little bit. Just a slightly darker shadow right under the top. So, okay, that this coming right up. That in there. We've got the little other window here. Slightly darker roof line here. Okay, this dark shape. Little wires and things, cables, smaller shapes here and there. I'm not really paying attention to accuracy. I'm just making some little marks and let the viewer figure out for themselves what it is they're looking at. Right. And again, comparatively, look how light that first wash is now that I've got my mids on and I'm putting darks on. So important to get strong enough in that first wash to compensate for the drying. What happens? Wanted a little more kind of violet at that end. Painting around that little stick one more time. Getting nice and dark with the bottom edge of this. Couple of tiny little shapes here. We've got the numbering and stuff going on. Another little cable or two coming down here on the front end. That helps pop that out. All right, so visually, my boat is coming forward quite a bit now. All right, we've got the little porthole here. Switch to an even smaller brush for my figures now. I'll zoom in a little bit. You don't need to see the reference photo and everything while I'm doing this, the people. Trying to get his gesture going. Switch to a color for his arm. Washing up there. Same thing, this gentleman's arm, a bit darker. Bit darker on his pants. Right. layer in there. We've got that dark shadow coming back here. It's all going to start connecting pretty soon to all this stuff in the background. This is going to be a nice dark shape connecting to the van. All right, now I can paint all the details on my van. The tires can come in here. Dark on the side of it, darken up the shadow underneath a bit more. Soften it. Make it look a little bit more metallic with a few more reflections coming up here. There's the side view mirror. This other tire coming down. Back end. Always connect your tires with a little drop shadow, anchor the thing down. When you're painting a ship, paint a reflection, anchor it down to the water. Painting a vehicle, anchor it down to the ground with the tires underneath it, the shadow underneath the tires. Okay, into the interior now, that back end. I'll leave a little bit of light shining through. Some of the windows. Little shape in the back of the van, some little something catching the sunlight. Whatever, just some of their cleaning materials or things they're working with. Darken up a couple of those tires a bit better. All right, the hatch. Open hatch up above here. All righty. Got that in. There's that dark shape on the bottom of the boat over here to help pop out the lighter back end of the van. Like so, it's all that fun negative painting. I love the shapes. I love negatively painting around things. I'm not a big fan of masking fluid. I don't like it. It leaves a mark that's just too correct. I like the incorrectness that you get, the little bit, the shapes are a bit off when you just do a negatively created light shape versus coming back and filling in something that was created with masking fluid. It's just too perfect, too obvious. And it takes away from the whole aspect of trying to get a loose painting in. So yeah, I know some of those shapes aren't perfect. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I want it that way. All righty. Okay, now I've got the shadow coming out from that ship, and that's going to negatively pop out some of the highlights on my figures here a bit more. Got this big drop shadow coming right up to his legs. And between them and coming out this direction. And that's going to define the front of that figure's legs a bit better. So okay, now make sure that my darks, I'm not as concerned about being all connected together the way I like to do with my middle values. So because now I'm trying to create some definition, you know, between my shapes at this point. So it's okay if they're not all connected. But that being said, anytime I can make two shapes into one, I'm usually creating a more interesting collection of shapes than separating everything out. So I'll try to take that opportunity to make sure some things are connected if they're there. If I have the chance. I darken up his shirt. He's wearing that backpack, so if I can define his backpack by painting around it now. We go. She's got a darker shadow on her side as well. That back arm. Okay, this figure. Trying not to get too carried away with how realistic I'm making my people. Just get their big gestures in and again, leave the rest to the viewer's imagination. I think figures, as soon as you put them into your painting, they automatically draw so much attention. And the more you try and make them really accurate, the worse they get. You can just show a little bit of their form. Like I said, give the viewer a bit of information and let their brains fill in the rest. And they'll look a lot more loose and painterly that way. I'm trying to get too carried away with things. Shadow should have been coming up a little closer to the back end there. Okay, this figure also, they're all wearing darker boots. Cast shadow from that figure. This one's going up. It's a kind of that's a shadow from this thing or what, but there's another little shape there. Okay, so if I zoom out a little bit now, you can kind of see, you know, all that activity going on around the boat. Draws the viewer's attention, the eye creates that separation, the depth, the contrast. Got a few more little shapes to put in foreground area, put some dry brushing on that post. Make it look like wood, weathered wood. And then a little bit into its reflection as well. And that has a cast shadow. Kind of anchors everything down to the ground. Okay, got the bottom of that tall red shape, the shadow side of that little post. Put that in here. And coming down like so. I'm going to turn my paper sideways. That's going to come right down to the side of the water like that. There we go. I've got that shape in here. Got a few little darker shapes along the water. I like this little thing going across there too. It's got some weeds and things hanging down to it. Nice sunny scene. Just what everybody thinks of when they think of England. Bright sunshine. Want to give the puddles a little three-dimensionality by putting just a little bit of a shadow on the top edge of one or two here. Okay. And again, just a couple of little dry brush strokes to show the angle of that, all that mud coming down. So drop shadow from that too. Okay, just a couple little dark things on my boats, not too much. A deeper red on that sail here. Let's see. I'm gonna just take a little knife and scratch out the mast from this one here. Just a bit of a highlight here and there. Another one here. Another one here. Okay, not too much more to do on that. The guts of it are in there. Some little details here and there, but I think most of it is there for you now. Just about wraps it up. Don't know how I did with time or anything. Got time to stick around for questions and more questions if anybody has some things that they want to ask, but darker in here again, just a little bit. Wanted to put a little bit of red on the tail lights, the back end of this. Do a bit of dry brushing on the grasses. There's just a few things that I want slightly darker down in that foreground area.
You've been so informative all the way through. That's why I can't think of any questions at the moment.
That's great.
I've got a question, Andy.
Sure.
When are you coming out to do a workshop for us?
We talked about that a little bit at the beginning. I would love to.
We'd love to have you.
Thanks.
We'll certainly invite you.
Great. All right. I think that just about wraps it up.
Goodness, thank you. It's looking wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
So
It's
far.
amazing. You made it look so easy, Andy. And we can see how important the value study is and
Absolutely, absolutely.
how important it is to inject some life into the scene with the people. And you've been extremely generous with your time, and we're very
Getting
grateful.
up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
My pleasure. It's fine. I'll nap all day. Now my work for the day is done.
Good. We look forward to seeing it on Instagram or Facebook, whatever you put it on.
Yep. I'll make sure and post it out there. And do you have does the Victoria Watercolour Society have like an Instagram page or something that you want me to?
We have a Facebook page.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. I'll make sure I'll look for that and mention you on there so that people can find you.
Oh, excellent. That's great. Now, I'm sure our members would benefit from your online courses as well. Some of Andy's courses are over 12 months, so you can do, a whole year of painting with Andy. Just check out his website.
Thank you. Yeah, the year-long course is opening on July 1st again for registration, online class. There's a lot of information in there. And it's kind of self-paced. I think when people join, they're worried because they've got, too much going on, but you can do it at your own leisure. Whenever you have time, you can go in there and go through the lessons and view the step-by-steps. Every month there's more content that I put into it. So, and everybody that's in that little workshop gets put into a private little online community as well, where you can post your practice lessons and things, and the students interact with each other in there. It's really fun. They have a great time with that. And I pop in there every once in a while I try to go in there every 2 or 3 days and see what people have been posting and give some feedback. A lot of times I'll do a little video in Procreate where I'm modifying the painting, almost like a little critique thing for them, so that they can kind of visually see what I'm talking about. So yeah, it's a really good. It's about 900 US for the year, but when you think about the cost of a workshop and travel and everything else, this is something that you have, right in your home that you can do. It's well worth it. It's a great source of